This is Robert Bartolacci, the Mindshare Learning Report, Canada's Learning and Technology e-magazine. And welcome to This Week in Canadian EdTech MindShareTV Unboxing BrainPOP Science with Tim Powers for Back to School. Thank you for joining me today, Tim.
It's a pleasure, Robert. Looking forward to it.
A little bit about Tim. Tim is a seasoned professional in the field of education, currently holding the position of Director of Science Sales at BrainPOP. With over 20 years of experience, Tim has decided his career to driving EdTech program strategy, fostering education business development, and actively promoting critical thinking and inquiry-based learning and methodologies within schools. At BrainPOP, Tim's expertise shines as he spearheads the company's new middle school offering, BrainPOP Science. As the subject matter expert, he plays a pivotal role as the primary liaison for districts interested in exploring and implementing BrainPOP Science. Tim effectively bridges the gap between the sales, marketing, professional learning, learning design, and product engineering teams to ensure seamless alignment of our initiatives with the diverse needs of districts we serve. Tim, and you're a Union College grad where my kids were once being recruited to play college hockey. So that's impressive. Great.
Yes, great hockey program.
Thank you so much. And thank you again for joining us. Why did BrainPOP decide to create a new and quite different offering specifically for middle grade science?
So, as many know, BrainPOP as a general tool has always been there and really kind of given that in-the-moment learning piece, those great videos and those great resources that kind of help students be able to kind of unlock new learnings or expand learnings that they've already had. Over time, as we were kind of doing some internal audits, we saw that a vast majority of our middle school usage, specifically in those grades 6 through 8, were around science topics. And we started to reach out to districts across the world saying, hey, your science teachers are really diving in on BrainPOP videos at that middle school level. As much as we love to hear that, is that really what they were looking for? And what we were starting to uncover from a lot of people was that people are searching for resources on trying to get better inquiry-based science tools in the hands of both teachers and students. So BrainPOP Science kind of emerged from that understanding of that there needed to be a resource that went beyond the videos that really helped both teachers and students unpack that concept of inquiry-based science or actually doing science.
Fascinating. So could you perhaps elaborate on the distinct qualities or functionalities that set BrainPOP apart from the school market?
Yeah, so we're BrainPOP Science. So BrainPOP Science is a separate product from regular BrainPOP. So it sits to the side of regular BrainPOP. And as we said, it's really guided specifically at that middle school level. So what we're trying to do with BrainPOP Science is dive a little bit deeper. Again, as we look at regular BrainPOP and we think of those videos, that's really that kind of in-the-moment learning. What we want to think about is, while still being supplemental, that we're in the lesson learning here. So that concept of, can we bring it to another level? And can we really kind of dive in on some specific things that we saw as needs in that science area? So some of those things that we focused in on were, can we really get students to make a big leap in student readiness and growth? We saw that there was a gap between the learning that students had in science in elementary school and what was expected of them in high school. So there are kind of practices that students need to understand. In Canada and Ontario specifically, those things that are in that achievement chart for science and technology, that concept of having students have knowledge of science, but then go beyond just having knowledge, being able to think and investigate and communicate and apply those skills. Those are the things that they're kind of core tenets of what we're trying to do in BrainPOP Science.
And you've mapped it to the Ontario curriculum.
Yes. So the product being built in the United States first was written to the next gen science standards. And then we've mapped BrainPOP Science, and we've also mapped regular science in the BrainPOP Essentials out to those entire Ontario standards, so that for our students and teachers working in Ontario, we know that we're meeting your specific standards as well.
And what intrigues me is that you really pay attention to the customer in the process of designing products.
Yeah, and it's that concept of, it needed to go deeper. And when we think of those Ontario standards and that kind of those things, when you and I learned science, it was all focused on the knowledge. So when we have to go a little bit deeper, it's that thinking and investigating, that communicating and applying. So I always like to use this screen to really compare and contrast. where you see Tim and Moby with that moon phases topic, that's the BrainPOP that we all know. It's still going to be, we're still developing science in there, but it's driven by that video. On the other side, you see BrainPOP science. And what makes BrainPOP science a little bit different is it's not video based, it's investigation based. So what we mean by a BrainPOP science investigation, everything starts with a guided question. In this particular case, it's why is a year longer on Mars than on Earth? And what students are then being driven to do is answer that particular question. So we're going to answer it in what we call a claim evidence reasoning response, which is kind of the go-to multidimensional kind of assessment tool in science to see if students understand inquiry-based learning. But what's really important is what comes between that question and that written response that a student's going to do. We need to put a variety of different resources in front of students so that they can learn how to gather information, analyze, and make observations in order to be empowered to answer that question.
Right. It's the notion of inquiry-based learning.
Yeah.
Fascinating. And so you're going to take us through this a little bit. What's the feedback been from educators and students that have been using the product?
Yeah, so I'll dive you through it in a second, but that question on the feedback has been pretty crucial. And I think what we found is a lot of our original assumptions around the fact that middle school was an area that there was a gap of this kind of learning has really come to fruition. So what we found from both teachers and administrators and students is that students were understanding knowledge in science. They were getting the topics of science. They were getting the content of science, but students were really struggling with that concept of how do they apply their learning. And what everybody liked here was that in kind of a shorter amount of time, being that we're still a supplemental tool, students were getting a chance to have lots of practice against the practices. So how do we get students to understand that they need to learn how to make observations from graphs and videos and readings? How do we get them to practice those skills of writing and break it down in a scaffolded format? People really like that. But the feedback has also kind of driven us to make that better. One of the big things we were getting from teachers was, this is great, but our students still need more scaffolding. They still need more kind of hand-holding as they get through that kind of difficult, higher level thinking skill of writing in science. So a lot of the updates that have come through the system, one of those big ones being further scaffolding along that writing process, came from that feedback from teachers.
Fascinating.
Yeah. Want to see a little bit of what the process looks like?
Absolutely.
Great. So as I said, when we kind of look at that, kind of setting our page on that orbits of the Earth, Moon, and Sun investigation there, just to kind of level set us, the concept is everything starts with a guided question, and then students are answering that guided question at the end of that investigation in that claim evidence reasoning response. But what we really needed students to do was learn how to gather the information they needed to do that. And this is where things are going to vary a little bit different than standard BrainPOP. And you're going to see kind of a plethora of different resources built in here that are really going to give students a really kind of concrete and different approach to doing science. So first, again, as we said, align everything out to those Ontario standards. But then as we get students in, we wanted everything to really be focused on that doing of science. What we wanted students to understand was they needed to be exposed to different ways to understand the concepts that they're being asked in that question. So the first thing we're looking at here are our three-dimensional worlds. So one of the resources that we built in beyond the videos was three-dimensional worlds. We wanted students to be able to experience science where it happened. So we went into a partnership with cospaces.edu, and they built out for us these fully immersive three-dimensional worlds. So the one where you're seeing here with the engineer standing up top there is our water power investigation, and a student is in a hydroelectric dam where they have the ability to fully explore that, go into the turbine room, see the upper and lower reservoirs, talk to the engineers, and start to use that as an ability to start making observations to gather information to answer that larger question that they're doing in the guided question.
This is a great example of virtual learning at its best, and hands-on too, where you get to manipulate tools and really, immerse yourself in
and really get students
process.
They need to go in and they need to see, and they need to see how it happens. They need to see when that turbine spins, that hydroelectric dam is connected to that electric grid, and they need to see those next steps in the process. Kind of in that same vein of doing, we wanted to make sure students had the ability to simulate and apply what they were learning. So there are some popular tools in terms of simulation. PhET simulations out of the University of Colorado are something that lots of science teachers use within their classes, but we wanted to make that process more streamlined. We wanted to make it so that a teacher knew directly where to put a student into a PhET simulation, and we wanted students to understand how to use these simulations. So we went into a partnership with PhET that allowed us to kind of have some editorial control where we can drop students into very specific spots in a PhET so that we can make sure that they're uncovering that scientific concept and applying those skills that they have kind of in a streamlined process. We also went into a partnership with another organization called Field Day to kind of fill some holes where there weren't simulations by PhET so that we're making sure kind of across all those domains of science, we're helping students out.
And how has it evolved since the launch?
Since the launch, it's really kind of where you're going to see is where the big thing adaption here has come is in that concept of how students are gathering observations. So I'll get to that in a second. As we wanted to really make sure that when they're in there, they're going to get there. The last little piece I want to touch on, because you had actually mentioned it, was kind of data manipulation.
Right.
A huge skill that students are going to need in high school and college and next level science classes is that ability to analyze data and not just analyze static graphs. They're going to need to go and actually do data manipulation. So we went into a partnership with Tuva also to bring their data manipulatives right into the product, but to also make sure that we were setting them up so that they were easily accessible by a middle school student and that they can get their feet wet in a new skill in data manipulation, so that as they got to the higher levels of that, they've been exposed to it. But the kind of guiding principle for all of these is that we want students making observations as they're doing the science. Remember, we're trying to connect them from having a guided question to answering in that claim evidence reasoning. So in each of those resources, you'll see that there were little buttons at the bottom, one that said add observation and one that said observations and has like a little picture of a notebook. This is, to me, the real difference maker in BrainPOP science. When a student has an aha moment in a video or in a PhET simulation or in one of those three-dimensional worlds, the second they have that aha moment, we want them to click that button that says add observation. And what's going to pop up is a text box for them to capture their note and an exact screenshot of what they were looking at when they captured that aha moment. So how do they almost build their own internal library of observations? And that's exactly what happens. Then those go into an observation library. So my running notes as I go through this process are living there for me.
Amazing. Well, congratulations on winning the 2023 Cody Award. What does that mean for BrainPOP and how are you different?
I think it validates what we've been doing. So it's nice to see that the hard work that's been put in and that kind of different approach to really diving into those scientific practices, kind of getting some recognition from those who are the experts in the science field. And I think what it does is it allows us to really help districts as there's a twofold piece. It's one, getting students to better understand inquiry-based learning, but most of our assessments that students are seeing at the end of middle school are moving to a multidimensional manner. And kind of getting that Cody Award really allows us to see, hey, we're onto something here because we're getting students test ready. So it's not test prep where they're going in and they're practicing questions. It's test ready where they're getting exposure to skills that they're going to need to unpack those harder level questions.
Amazing. I have to ask you about AI because it is the rage, especially for back to school. How does BrainPOP Science leverage AI, artificial intelligence, to personalize the learning experience?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting question. I think one of the things that really comes into play, especially when we're talking AI, is the skill that we're really getting students to do in BrainPOP Science, and as you can see here from that scaffolded claim evidence reasoning approach, is writing. So when we get students to write, where AI is going to come into play is in feedback. So what we're doing right now is doing research on, so for all of our investigations that all have a claim evidence and reasoning response, we've created rubrics and we've created exemplars for teachers. What we're testing on AI right now is, can we build an AI system that is going to allow that feedback process to be easier for teachers? Can we be building out off of existing student examples and off of those exemplars we wrote, kind of ways to use AI to allow science teachers who may not have a writing background be able to give better feedback against student writing? So it's a future state product for us, but it's one that we're really kind of diving in on.
Amazing. And Talk to me about how BrainPOP helps expand science teachers' capacity.
Yeah. So I think that's one of the kind of the key factors when you're talking about inquiry-based learning is it's kind of a new approach for teachers as well. So we need to make sure that we are supporting teachers in this switch to inquiry-based learning and multidimensional learning as much as we are for students. So what that really comes down to is being able to build out robust teacher resources that aren't just giving kind of right and wrong answers, but are really helping teachers understand why things are happening in their classes. So, inquiry based learning is very much based on not having a right or wrong answer. It's about a student being able to defend their answer. So, we need
Right.
to elicit to teachers things like student misconceptions. Where do we think students are going to have hiccups? What's the science behind those hiccups? And how can you kind of work through supporting those in your class? Another big piece of that is those exemplars. If we're going to have students writing in class, we need to give teachers really strong understanding of what good responses would be at different levels for students, not just for feedback, but actually to drive the conversations and discourse in class. So they're helping students level up in those particular skills. So a lot of time is spent on ensuring that those teachers also have those driving forces that are going to make them better purveyors of inquiry-based learning.
Absolutely. And perhaps give teachers back time by creating
Yes.
such great resources for their core teaching offering. So,
Yeah.
what's next for you, Tim?
So what's next? So some really cool things are launching in BrainPOP Science. So when we first launched out and we built this out, we were really trying to make sure that we built BrainPOP Science really well across those kind of known three domains of science. But what we were really working on in the background was infusing more engineering. So for launching for back to school this year, we actually will have built into BrainPOP Science engineering products. And these are real engineering design practices. There's a few things that we thought about when we wanted to do engineering in BrainPOP. And one big one at the end is going to really stand out as something different that you have not seen from BrainPOP before. First and
Very cool.
foremost, we wanted to make sure it was really a blended approach. A lot of engineering that we're seeing in schools is fully hands-on. And for engineering, you really need to be hands-on. But we wanted students to also learn how a true engineer works. And engineers work in brainstorming platforms. They're gathering their thoughts and they're having kind of discourse amongst the engineering teams in their brainstorm processes in a system. So you'll see we brought things in like whiteboarding sessions and note-taking sessions. And how can students use a Post-it note board to really challenge their ideas? We wanted them to understand that engineering happens off of real-world problems. So all of our engineering projects are going to be built off of real-world problems. The first one to launch is you dropped your keys down a sewer grate. How are you going to go in and concept that? We want them to go through iterations. So first brainstorm with no constraints, and then we're going to bring in constraints. And then you'll see things like we integrated PhET simulations and videos. Where can we teach the science on that? But the real power then comes, and something you may not have seen from BrainPOP Science, in that last step, they're actually building a hands-on model. So not just being based on the computer, we're doing real kind of kitchen sink science, making sure the materials are things that are going to be in a classroom. But we want students to iterate to that point where they're actually building something that they can go test that model, that you could drop a key on the floor and see it from the constraints we have, we can actually go pick it up. So a really kind of different and fun thing that we're launching from back to school. And those engineering projects are going to continue to build out. And it's not separate from BrainPOP Science. It's actually part of BrainPOP Science.
Amazing. One of my sons would have benefited greatly back in the day from this because he is teacher in physics said he was doing exceedingly well, but he should go into engineering, but he didn't understand engineering, so he became a CPA. So there you go.
So it's that concept of can we expose kids in middle school to what real engineering is, and can we do it in the science class, not having to always pull it out to a separate class? Can we make it something that attaches to the standards and is something that the regular science teacher is also going to be able to impose on kids?
Well, one other thing in terms of what's next for you is that I understand your colleague Tina Shaw will be at the STAO conference in Ontario in the next week or so. So look forward to connecting with her in Toronto.
Yeah.
And there's her
there we go.
information.
Tina is our go-to for all things Canada. So I wanted to make sure that we had her information up there and ready to go.
Fantastic. With that, Tim Powers, thank you so much for your time this morning on unboxing BrainPOP Science And thank you again for your time. And be sure to check out brainpop.com for more information. And until next time, keep the digital learning curve steep.